Hi, I'm James Ward, a developer advocate at Google. I want to walk you through a couple presentations about containers, what they are, how to create them, and then how to deploy them and use them. And so we're going to start out with just the very basics of what a container is and how to use it locally. So let's take a look at Docker Hub. So I'm on Docker Hub and I'm looking at the Nginx container. So these are the container images that contain the Nginx HTTP server. And the Docker Hub registry is a place where these are stored up on the internet. There's other registries that you can use as well. You can use the Google Cloud Container Registry, you can use the GitHub Container Registry, or many others. Really, this is just a place to store these up online. So I'm on the Nginx one, and we can browse through and see information about it. We can see tags, which are like the versions of this thing, and other information. But I'm going to hop over into my command line, where I'm actually going to use this container. So I've installed Docker, and that's fairly easy to do, and it's cross-platform, so that's nice. But now I can just say Docker, and then there's a bunch of commands that I can use on Docker. I'm going to do Docker run, and I'm going to tell it -it, which just gives me essentially interactive running thing. And then I need to map ports. So Docker, what it does is it's like a lightweight virtual machine. And so it's going to be running this container, this Nginx container in this case, in this virtualized environment. And so I need to map, if I want to be able to communicate with that virtual machine, I need to do some mapping, like ports and files, any kind of communication in or out of this container that's going to run here inside of my local machine. I need to do some mapping. And so I'm going to tell it that on my local machine, I'm going to listen on port 8080. And then anytime that I make a connection to 8080 on my local machine, I'm going to forward that to port 80 in the container. And then I tell it the URL to get the container from. Docker, the command, has built-in support for the Docker Hub registry. So on the Docker Hub registry, because this name is just Nginx, then I can just do a short abbreviation and just say Nginx. Okay, and so now that will let's run this and see what happens. So now it's pulled down the Nginx container. I already had that stored locally on my machine, and so we didn't actually see it downloaded. It actually pulled from cache. And that's one of the really nice things about working with Docker containers is that they cache very easily and very well because each layer, which we'll get into in a bit, has a SHA that represents the that layer. And so that makes it so they cache easily. So I've got that container cached locally, and now I've started it up and mapped the port. So now if we go in our browser and make a request to localhost 8080, what happened was we see the Nginx welcome page. That's great, but it sent this request now into that container that's running inside of Docker. Okay, so great that we could run that container locally. Nice thing about this is portability. So you on your machine can run it, and you're going to get the exact same behavior, and it doesn't matter what operating system you're running it on. So that portability is really one of the key things to Docker. Using Docker is that once you create a container, it should be able to run anywhere that containers run, and we'll talk about that more in part 3. Okay, so I'm going to cancel out. That just now will kill the process for my Nginx Docker container. And now I'm going to use a tool called Dive. And Dive is nice for exploring what's actually inside of these containers. So I'm going to dive into the Nginx image. And here we can get a much better picture of what is actually inside of a container. So the container image is really like a zip file that has all the files that are needed to run this thing, run the container. And so most container images that you'll see have a Linux operating system as a base, and then they add some other things on top of that. And so we can see the different layers. So Docker has the concept of layering so that we can start with a base image, which is like our operating system, and then we can add other layers on top. So you may have a layer for your dependencies of your application and then a layer for your actual application. And really what this does is it makes it so that caching works much better, because if you just change the top layer of your container image, then it's not going to have to re-download all of the other layers. It can just pull those from cache. And so we can take a look at what's actually inside this Nginx container image. We'll see that in the first layer here, we get really just like the base operating system. And if we take a look at all the directories there we go. Okay, now as we go to other layers, we can see the size. The second layer is 64 megabytes. Now this adds some other stuff in. Likely this is the actual like Nginx dependencies, and Nginx itself is what's being added in that layer. And we could go explore and see what exactly gets added. You can see the command that was used to actually create this layer there. So all that metadata is stored, and then we can continue to walk down the other layers. We get some just a few files here that Nginx needs. So that's everything that was in that container image, which is really multiple files compressed into, I think tar-gz is the default format for compression, and each layer is its own archive file, and so that they're easily cacheable. Okay, so we've seen Nginx running locally. We've seen how we can map ports. We can also map files. We've seen how we can dive into the contents of that container image and see how we can use that all locally. We can do all sorts of other things with the Docker command. We can run things in the background. We can go in a running container and run commands in it. Let's try one thing real quick here. Let's go back to our Docker run, and let's try to say, all right, I want to you have the command that I actually run in this container be bash. And I'm not sure if this container image has bash in it, but let's try it and see. Okay, looks like it did. So now we're actually inside of the container. We are in a bash prompt, and now we could go explore what's on the file system inside of this container image and run commands in here. But you'll see all this stuff is happening very quick because Docker has the ability to do this like lightweight virtualization based on something called containerd is the actual thing that the virtualization is based on. But you could take any container image that you find on Docker Hub or on any other container registry, pull it down to your local machine and use it. There is a longer format, so if I want to use something from like the Google Container Registry, then we'll do gcr.io and then specify the URL there to the full container image that we would pull from the Google Container Registry. So because in this case, if we just do Nginx, that's going to pull from Docker Hub, but otherwise we could specify a full URL. Okay, so that's your real quick introduction to containers and how you use them locally. And in part 2, we'll take a look at how we create containers. But thanks for watching.